Welcome, everybody, to our panel discussion on the topic of sales manager enablement. My name is Damon Jones. I'm the head of strategy and growth at Sandler, and I'm going to be your moderator for the discussion today. I'm joined by three leading experts on this topic. So let me just introduce them. We've got Dave Matson, who's president and CEO of Sandler. Happy to introduce Andrew Quinn, who's vice president of sales productivity and enablement at HubSpot. And finally, we have Michelle Kanan, who is sales productivity lead at Amazon. So delighted you're able to join us, guys, and I'm looking forward to the discussion today. So sales enablement has become a big hot topic in many organizations in recent years. So we're seeing roles, departments, technologies all get, caught in the names of sales enablement. A lot of that has been focused on enablement of the salespeople, the sales representatives. So we want to pivot that slightly for today and look at sales manager enablement as well. So we're going to look at it in two dimensions. Sales managers certainly have a role in enabling their salespeople and that report to them. We also want to look at how do we think about the sales managers themselves and their enablement. I think all too often they've been overlooked and underserved in many cases. So we want to dive into that topic with the panel today. So let me start with that question for you, Andrew, if I may, and ask you, how do you define sales manager enablement?
Sure. So I'm going to draw that back a little bit and say the first thing that an organization needs to do is define enablement in general. I found that word to be very problematic. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and your organization needs to get really clear on what you mean by sales enablement. And one of the ways we think about that is sales enablement is a business discipline and not a department. So it is a discipline not different than marketing or finance or anything else. It's something that the organization needs to adopt. And we think about that discipline with three key buckets of activity relative to change. Because ultimately, enablement is about enabling change to happen, to get people to do things tomorrow that they couldn't do today. And that falls in three things, in my opinion. One is skill adoption, and then knowledge acquisition and behavior change. And anything we're trying to do in our business, when we're trying to move our sales organization from one place to another, incorporates one, two, or all three of those things. So then when we think about the sales manager, part of defining sales manager enablement in my mind is, never surprise the sales manager relative to their reps, right? They should always know what's coming before it lands in the reps' laps. And when we think about sales enablement in that term, when we're thinking about knowledge acquisition, skill adoption, behavior change, how do we make sure the sales managers know in advance what their role is going to be, and we've supported them to take that role on relative to where we're trying to move the sales organization, ultimately in service of driving the number.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. Michelle, can I turn this same question to you and build on maybe some of the comments we heard from Andrew?
Sure, absolutely. He's spot on in thinking about how we define enablement. Everywhere you go, somebody has a different view of enablement. The biggest challenge there is really going into a company and understanding what the experience level is of the folks who are already in place, how they've worked with enablement in the past, and what their future focus is for enablement and what they're trying to solve for. So much of enablement's role is to come in, help educate on what their spin of enablement is going to be and break down into the categories that Andrew mentioned to make sure that there is alignment from the start. So many enablement programs kind of shoot themselves in the foot and have a hard time getting started because there isn't that alignment up front. So I would just add that that's probably a critical piece of that conversation in determining that definition.
I would say, Michelle and Andrew, exactly. And to me, it's almost mind-boggling that we would have sales enablement without sales management enablement. Because to me, they kind of go hand in glove, right? If you think about it, sales managers have such a tough job. They're juggling so many different things, whether it's from, this last minute report from upstairs, or they're helping customers, or helping their sales rep. They've got a million things to do. The challenge, of course, with sales management enablement is that you've got almost half of the sales managers coming into their space have no experience. So they're probably coming from the field, and you would do great in the field. So therefore, please be great as a sales manager. And of course, that's a big jump for a lot. And then we have more and more reps not hitting quota. So obviously something's not working, right? And the issue is everyone says, yes, let's do sales enablement. Yes, sales enablement, absolutely. But when you say sales management enablement, they're like, well, I don't know, let's focus on the sales group. And I think that's part of the issue. And hopefully we'll be talking about that today. But I agree with Andrew. We say it's slightly different, but I think, directionally it's the same. We're looking at mindset or attitude. We're looking at all the behaviors that they should be doing. And then of course, the techniques that they should be doing. And those three areas, I think, are really important as we move forward.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Yeah, we're definitely going to delve back more into the sales management enablement more as we go on here. One of the things, Andrew, you touched on was the whole, nomenclature and enablement can be problematic. So, Michelle, I'm actually going to throw this question to you to begin with. It seems to me that there could be a blurring of responsibilities between sales enablement, where that's a dedicated role or function in an organization, and what we're also asking sales managers to do in terms of enabling their people that report to them. So I could see some blurring of lines here. How do you think we should think about their mutual accountabilities?
Yeah, it's not just a blur of lines, right? It is a hot potato game. Sometimes it is a lack of ownership. Sometimes it's scapegoating. It comes in many different forms. But the reality is that when you look at how enablement first starts out in an organization, it's usually from sales managers who are taking extra time out of their day, or top reps who are taking extra time out of their day to do some of the enablement heavy lifting until they bring on an official practitioner. So because of that, you start out of the gate with blurred lines. You've got folks who are taking some ownership. They might be overworked. They might be taking on this extra workload because they know that it's important to the business. But then when that new person comes in, the lines are blurred on what their new responsibilities are going to be. You pair that with the lack of definition or a need to re-educate and redefine, and that's where the things start to get quite blurry. In terms of accountability or mutual accountability, the way that I've always really set up these programs is enablement is responsible for the strategy, right? We're looking big picture. You work in tandem with sales managers to identify what the gaps are. That input to enablement is going to help build that strategy and what that program is eventually going to be. And oftentimes in old school enablement thinking, we think of it as just siloed training. We show up, we do the training, but that's not enough. And as we think of the future of enablement, we know that that is not where we can stop or where we should stop. We need to continue forging ahead. And so where the accountability really lies is actually that next step in reinforcement. So oftentimes we have managers who say, I really want this educational program. I'm excited for it. Enablement shows up, puts it together, runs it, and then nothing happens. No behavior change happens. And everyone's kind of playing hot potato with, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. I don't know why it's not happening. And so that accountability and that upfront contract, to steal from Sandler, really needs to take place and say, hey, we've agreed that we're going to do this training, and then here is our reinforcement strategy. Here are your responsibilities. You're going to be the person that is checking to make sure that they do it, is holding them accountable, has kind of rewards for when they do it well, and maybe a little bit of a stick for when they don't. And then enablement is there to be the support system, to answer questions, to provide resources, and to take all of those key learning and great examples to push them into future projects.
Now, Michelle, just to jump in, and to be honest, I think one of the big takeaways that I just got from you was you have to sit down and have that discussion about roles and responsibilities, and not just make that assumption. Andrew said early on, if you sit 100 people and ask them for a sales enablement definition, if they're in sales enablement, you're going to get 100 different definitions. And I think that holds true with sales management enablement. And so to have very clear lines of where do I start, where do I end, and not have any wishy-washy gray areas, that hot potato that you're talking about, I think is key. And I think also just doing it once isn't good enough. These are things that you have to keep going back each and every time. Well, we talked about that last year. Yeah, okay. But you have to have those initiatives that you keep driving that home, because most sales managers are really reactive. They got a million things that they're doing, and we just have to make sure that that's grounded.
The metaphor that I use for this, right? It's like every month the sales manager and the salespeople, they're facing this wave from their organization. And it's a big wave. Like we're talking like a big 15-footer that they're facing. And they're standing there going, I got to get away from this thing because it's going to swamp me, right? So they look, and that wave is basically like, the new legal compliance thing they need to do, the new go-to-market motion that's happening, the product launch, the performance reviews they have to write, and there's all this stuff that's coming at them. And in many ways, enablement is trying to knock that wave down and smooth it all out. And it's a coordinating, sequencing, and communication function so that the manager understands what their real priorities are in the face of adopting these changes that have to happen. Because if you just leave that to chance, every other organization in the company essentially is striving to accomplish things through the sales organization, right? Because ultimately everything in business is a function of what we're selling and the revenue we're bringing in, and sales is the conduit for that to occur. So every one of those other departments is in a sense trying to help the sales organization, but when they do that in an uncoordinated way, it's virtually impossible. And the sales managers end up being the choke point for that.
Yeah.
And they really look for, I'm focused on the path of least resistance to my outcomes, which is hitting my quota and delivering on my number. And everything else they're going to ignore, which then causes change to go sideways.
Those sales managers too, they get away with it. That's, I think,
Sure.
the crime that occurs is unless you make a really strong, compelling connection with the most senior sales leader, that this is important, get their buy-in, get them to sign on to these initiatives. They need to be holding those sales managers accountable, who are then holding reps accountable. It's always a bad situation when enablement is going and chasing individual reps. It's not a good use of your enablement person's time. And it shows, it's a key indicator of a misalignment of that definition.
Yeah, the message is, would you like us to close more business or do this other thing, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, so that I think that's a big point. Andrew, I'll go back to you. Is, I think we've all talked about how much we're layering on and putting on frontline sales managers, right? I mean, they're the connection to the customer, they're trying to hit their numbers, they're the feedback loop back into the organization for many things, right? So I think we're all very conscious of how much is on their plate and the many plates that they feel they're spinning. Andrew, I know you've done a lot of work around this in your organization. How have you tried to orchestrate this so that it doesn't feel like one more thing on the sales manager's plate, and more like they can integrate it into how they run their team and their business?
Absolutely. So we have a formal sales manager enablement function inside my enablement team. It's 3 people. It's not an enormous organization. Like we have our entire sales organization, we keep growing so much for the exact number, but it's somewhere around like 1,100 people total, about 700 sales reps, another 150 sales managers, and the surround sound stuff as part of the organization. But ultimately, we look at sales manager enablement as friction reduction. That's ultimately what we're trying to do, is how do we take as much friction out of their way relative to all the things that they need to navigate in the role that they've got. And one of the primary drivers of that is effective communication. So one of the things that used to happen inside HubSpot is that an initiative would occur and the sales managers and sales reps would learn about it at exactly the same time. And what would happen is invariably the rep would go to the sales manager 10 minutes later and go, hey, what's that all about? What am I supposed to do? And the manager goes, I don't know. I just learned about it same time you did. And that whole thing just falls apart. So we actually have a very deliberate cascading flow where I meet with all of our I would call them like executive groups for the different segments and geographies. It's about 7 groups of senior executives. And I meet with them at least 8 weeks in it every month on a monthly cadence. And I'm talking about things that are going to flow into their organization that are going to happen about 6 to 8 to 10 weeks away. So they know this enablement initiative is coming down the pike. They're well aware of when this is going to hit their sales managers. And we always make sure the sales managers know about it first. So they get fully introduced to exactly what's going to happen, how it's going to roll out, the role they're going to play. Their leaders are already bought in. And then they're fully equipped. So when it hits the sales rep, the manager knows exactly what they have to do. They're fully equipped to do that. They're never surprised. And it makes that transition easier. Now, that just requires you to be thinking up front about and having really good sequencing about how things are going to flow into the sales organization, so you have good advance notice. And we think a lot about, basically the level of effort and impact relative to any enablement initiative when we're trying to figure out those priorities and how they're going to flow in. And we think a lot about the cognitive lift that's on the sales rep and sales manager's shoulders when we're trying to prioritize what we're actually going to flow in and how it's going to flow. They only have so much mental and physical bandwidth to handle this stuff. So in our sales management enablement practice, we're very focused on that cognitive lift they have to make and the actual effort to drive that thing forward. And we try to really sequence those things so it's never too heavy. And we own a couple of things like the weekly sales manager meeting that we run, which is a communication conduit. We have a variety. We have our weekly sales newsletter. That's another conduit we have. We have those communication meetings that I run with the senior executives. We have a variety of different channels that we use to ensure that people have very strong advance notice at the level that they should have it, which is a linchpin to making this stuff work.
Excellent. That's really helpful. I think some great tips for our audience out there. Michelle, you touched on, trying to make sure that the managers feel accountable and not a victim in some of these things. What are some of the things, Michelle, that you've seen work in your organization?
Yeah, definitely. To touch on what Andrew was talking about, one of the things that is a hallmark of a really successful program is that trust that's earned. At Amazon, we have an entire leadership principle about earning trust. And it's probably one of the most important aspects for an enablement person to have a successful sales manager program is to earn the trust of the folks that are going to be in the program. And you can do that in various ways, but really being that gatekeeper of all the stuff that's coming towards them to ensure that you're kind of calming that wave, that you're prioritizing for them, and that you're making it easy as possible for them to move forward. When you're building a program, one of my favorite hallmarks is really the camaraderie that happens when you bring all of your sales managers together. There is so few instances other than a generalized meeting where all of these folks are together and they're learning about what it means to be a sales manager. And they're actually, gaining new skills. They're actually being able to understand how to properly leverage enablement. So to me, that is a really strong indicator. And then to touch back on that other piece, the accountability, another strong indicator is that they're taking ownership of their part in these programs that are being disseminated, and that they are actually holding their reps to being able to showcase their work, right? Being able to show their behavior change. That's another great hallmark.
Great, very helpful. So Dave, I want to circle back to you, if I may, and zero in more specifically on sales manager enablement. I think we talk, a lot's been talked about sales representative enablement, but let's think really about how we can help our sales managers be more effective and equipped to do their roles. What, if companies invest in sales manager enablement, what kind of challenges do you think that should help them solve for?
Well, I think we talked a little bit about one of the big ones is that sales managers are the bottleneck for an awful lot of things that happen in our organization. So when we've invested in sales enablement, those investments would actually have a much higher ROI if in fact we had sales management enablement. Because at the end of the day, enablement can do just a bang up job, but we still have to have it reinforced. We still have to have the day-to-day ownership with sales leadership. So I think that's a big one. I think another one is certainly if we could teach sales leaders, sales managers, how to do a better job, let's say, in the sales process. Our sales funnel would have much better hygiene. We wouldn't have the peaks and the valleys that we're all worried about, or we wouldn't have everybody closing the last 2 days of the month. How did that happen? All of those things where we're negotiating away margin to get that deal. But the bigger thing is, I love what Michelle said, which is accountability. Because if you ask and say to a sales manager, this is what we feel is important for you, and this is what we're going to do, and here is your responsibility. In essence, you're starting a culture of accountability. And with that, would then hopefully cascade down to the sales reps, because you could talk to any senior executive. They're going to say sooner or later, I wish we had a culture of accountability. I wish people were more accountable. So I think by having sales management enablement, that actually starts that process with that group. But certainly things like onboarding would be much better if we had an investment in sales management enablement and predictability. Just more predictability in the sales management function, I think, are some of the big ones that you would get if you invested in sales management enablement.
I think there's two flows here. Like, one is the role that managers play in enablement and how do we enable them to do that role. And then there's the enablement of sales managers to be good sales managers, right? And on that side of it, like, things that we've done is we've created the source of truth for the discipline of sales management. Like, what is the right way to forecast? What is the right way to run a pipe review? What is the right way to run a one-on-one? What is the right way to coach, sales skill development? What is the right way to have performance conversations? And how do you do those functions? And those marry up to a set of core competencies. Like, these are the competencies you expect a manager to possess. And then creating like that pipeline. So, we have an active team lead program where we're developing sales reps to become future managers. To your point, David, you made earlier, like, a lot of times we just take the top performer and plunk them in a sales manager seat and said, you're smart, go figure it out. Like, that never works well. You need a pipeline to get people into that seat. And then you need a pipeline to get those managers into the director's seat, right? Particularly if you're an expanding sales organization, you're going to be moving those people up in a lot of ways. It's like we've done a lot of work to define those sources of truth, define those competencies, create the pipeline so people are building those competencies ready for the next role. And then also trying to just remove the friction in their job. So, like, one of the things we've done, which has worked really well, is like we created these, they're called rep ramp tracks. And basically we have a very rapidly growing sales organization. One of the things the sales managers struggle with is that consistency and how do I get my reps up to speed? So there's a lot of focus on ramping the reps, but how do we equip the managers to do their job of helping that rep ramp? So, we built a whole bunch of materials programmatically that the manager uses. So it's a very light lift for them to help somebody get from 0 to hitting quota within their ramp time. So they're not all recreating their own approaches to doing that. How do we equip them with the tools to make that as easy as possible? So there's really are those two enablement flows in my mind.
Yeah. Two additional things that come to mind actually when you mentioned that is the deduplication of effort. Right. So we've got a ton of sales managers who some are successful and some are not. And because they're not sharing those best practices, because they're all trying to reinvent the wheel in their particular segment themselves, you're just having all of these, processes that are duplicated. And so being able to make sure you're streamlining that's a huge piece. And then the second piece is, talk to a sales leader who isn't concerned about quota. Right? They need to hit that number. CROs are looking at that. They're looking at how to hire fast enough in order to hit that number. And so often enablement is kind of pushed to just the onboarding. But it's so much more than that. And I think the more we can focus on up-leveling our managers, it means it's a really smooth transition when somebody is exiting our onboarding program and moving into their day-to-day role where learning doesn't stop. Doesn't mean you exit onboarding and you're a full-fledged rep and you know how to just, hit the ground running, you're going to hit quota nonstop. That's not how it works. We know that sales is a profession of continuously pushing yourself. And so it is, a partnership between enablement and sales managers to make sure that they're getting the investment at the same level that a rep would be.
Well, if you think about what you just said, if you have a model, like Andrew said for sales management or Michelle for sales, when you've produced that, you've taken the best of the best, right? You've taken a playbook, and adults learn by imitation and illustration. So if you've shown me the best way to do it, then I can mimic it. I don't have to make that up as I go. I don't have to learn by the road of hard knocks. And, I've just wiped out half my sales force as I was trying to figure it out. And that's actually a question I'd love to ask you two, which is, how many times have you heard from salespeople the following? They don't, however they say it, they don't respect their sales manager. There's two reasons for turnover, right? Everyone says it's money, and that's the reason people give, but it's really either I'm stalled, I'm not learning, or I don't respect, or there's an issue with my sales manager. And if we could do a better job on the sales management enablement side, I think that even our turnover and our job satisfaction on the sales side would increase. Have you guys felt the same way?
Absolutely. When you think about that path to becoming a sales manager, even that path to being in sales, those folks are not going to school to become a salesperson. They're falling into it. They are figuring it out on their own. They're going through those own mechanisms. A lot of salespeople are not even, what we call classically trained in some of the great methodologies. And so because of that, they're kind of just scraping it together, and they apply that same brute force and grit when they get into the sales manager role. And they're so focused on how they were successful, right? That they have a really hard time letting go and evangelizing and empowering the folks underneath them to be able to figure out what a really consistent method is of success. And so I would agree, wholeheartedly on that front.
That reminds me of a couple of things. One is the sales managers that are most successful are the ones that are very good at helping people succeed on their own terms, right? Those sales managers that try to clone themselves always struggle because it's very hard to get somebody to succeed the same exact way that I do. And we look to try and create a bunch of, I would say, straightforward and simple to understand frameworks relative to the pathway someone's on. To your point earlier, Michelle, when they exit sales training, right, it's now on the sales manager to essentially get them to that level of consistent performance. And, they don't exit sales training being proficient. So one of the things we talk about is how do we put reps on the path of proficiency and over performance? And they're going to do that by learning, doing, and mastering, right? They're going to learn this thing, they're going to do it and practice, and ultimately they achieve mastery. And that could take quite a long time to do that. But if they understand that they are on this path to proficiency and over performance, and it requires them to learn, do, and master. And that same thing happens again when you get promoted to a sales manager. You're going to do that same thing. New job, you got to learn, you got to do, you got to master, and you can be on the path of proficiency and over performance. The more we lock into these sort of key touchstone phrases, it builds that credibility with enablement because people can lock onto that stuff. And I'm always very mindful of trying to come up with very memorable ways to think about what enablement's actually doing. It makes that job of getting people to buy into the program just a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Yeah. You touched on some really interesting things earlier, Andrew. I want to circle back on when you talked a little bit about some of the succession planning. It seems to me everybody close to this topic for years has been talking about the same thing, which is, almost this Peter principle of we take a great sales contributor as a rep and turn them into a mediocre manager, right? And don't give them the tools, training, etc., enablement to enable them to be effective. And some figure it out, right? And it may be a slow path to victory, but they figure it out. And to your point, I think, Michelle, others, are wedded to what made them successful when they were a rep, right? I'll just go close deals and get close to accounts, and that'll that'll win the day for my team, right? So, and I know there's, you know, a lot of different ways to think about it, but it sounds like that's something, Andrew, at HubSpot, you've given a lot of thought to.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, you know, when you think about people that are candidates that you see as great candidates to be sales managers, and then sales managers that can go on to sales leaders, maybe in a more elevated role, are there specific traits or, you know, characteristics that you have looked for that would point to things that you've seen work and be successful?
Yes, certainly. To, I guess, add a little bit of extra color to what you just talked about, right? Like when you take that manager or that rep that was a stellar rep, and you haven't necessarily evaluated their capacity for leadership, right? And for people to want to follow them, and you put that person in that seat and leave them to their own devices. I mean, how many people do they damage in the process? Like, you just see that happening because they're just trying to make somebody do it their way. They don't know how to lead somebody to success. And we typically do that over and over and over again in our organizations. And we've strived hard to break that cycle. One of the ways is, like, very early on, we try to take reps and we buddy them up with newer reps, and we're looking for people that have that gene for helping others to succeed, and they don't feel like they're in competition with their fellow reps. They want to elevate their fellow reps, and you're looking for those glimmers of leadership, and they don't necessarily need to be the A plus performer. Like, in our mind, it's like, B plus and up, right? Can be a great sales manager. Like, they need to do the job. They know how to deliver. They can do it. They might not be the most consistent quota buster, but like, they're good. But man, they can get people to follow them and do the right thing. And those people can be sometimes your most fantastic sales managers. So we have a whole set of like ways in which reps can demonstrate that they actually have that leadership capacity. And they start doing it as, a buddy in the buddy system. They have ways that they can contribute to their team. Then ultimately they can join the team lead program. And that's a rotational program that we run. It's not like a hard coded like level where you're now a team lead level and it's got different compensation. It's actually a round robin. You're in that seat for 6 months. And you do team lead stuff, and then you rotate off and somebody else gets a chance. But that gives us a really good identifier of who's got real good sales manager potential. And then we're able to then put them into a bit more of a formal sales manager track to get ready to be in that job. And we start giving them additional responsibilities, getting them ready for the role. But that's been a really instrumental way, because we're promoting a lot of people into sales manager jobs. And the majority of them are from within. We've got a lot of success getting people in that seat who don't have that problem that David illustrated earlier, which is like, I'm leaving the business because I don't have respect for my manager. These are people that have done the job, and they also are people that others want to follow.
Absolutely.
And is that particular program, out of curiosity, something that people volunteer for? Or is that something that, hey, we see this, you should do that. We see potential, we should see that. Because there's a huge difference. I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a nomination. So their sales manager and director make a decision on who's going to go into the team lead program. We've got about 700 reps around the country, around the world. We put probably, there's one team lead per sales team. So we might have like 40 or 50 of them in that program, and they'll do that gig for 6 months, and then we'll rotate them out and get another group that's nominated in by their manager. And then what you end up having is a pretty good pool of potential, people that you've now looked at, and you've got a sense of who's got the chops for it. Like, they're naturals at it. They've got those leadership attributes. You're able to figure them out a bit quicker. And then start working with those individuals that really show the strong promise. And also, they've realized that I like this kind of work, because some people get in that and they go, the sales management thing is not for me.
I agree. There's this focus that we have on salespeople. We really tie them to the number. And yet, when we think about management, there's a number component, but there is a soft skills element. And so the two things that I think are really, really important to highlight or look for in somebody who's going to be potentially a strong leader for the organization is somebody that exhibits ingenuity, right? So often with deals, you do have to get kind of creative. You got to figure out how to inspire the team, how to get them through a lull if something isn't going well. So that ingenuity aspect is really important, but not at the expense of integrity. And so often we see sales teams doing really unnatural behaviors to get themselves across the line. And I think the mark of a really strong sales leader is somebody that has that integrity to say, I understand that we want to get across that line. We're not going to do it in an unnatural way because we want to make sure that the company is successful, not just this team, not just you as an individual, or not just myself. So those are probably the two markers that I personally look for amongst many others to promote somebody to a manager.
Great, thank you. Thank you both. There's some great insights there. You know, at Sandler, we've been thinking a lot about sales managers. We just feel that so many organizations and a lot of the work we do routinely is very much oriented around the sales individual, the salesperson, and we feel that sales managers, leaders are underserved. They should be given the equivalent amount of enablement support and training that their people are getting, if not more. In fact, when you think about the yield one might get from that. So it's a big thing we're focusing on as an organization. To really go and make sure that we can be a resource for sales managers. The way I kind of think about it is, it'd be great if we can help sales professionals become great sales managers and great sales managers become great sales leaders. So I think that's a worthy thing for us to pursue. But Dave, let me pivot, or play off that with you, if I may, and just share your thoughts on what do you think would be some core components of a great, sales management or enablement program?
Well, I think we just talked about a lot of them, to be honest with you. I think certainly one of the things that I would focus in on is progression. What do we have to do in this phase of my career and then this phase? I think oftentimes what I see when it comes to certain sales enablement and also certain sales management enablement is they throw the kitchen sink. These are all the things that you have to do as a sales manager, and you need a PhD in all of these. And that's not how it really works. I think that there are some nice to haves and some need to haves. And I would focus on the need to haves as quickly as possible. And that's going to be different for each and every organization. But if I go back to the initial question, when Andrew was talking about, what's the definition of sales enablement or sales management enablement, I look at it in the same three buckets. Again, we're looking at attitudes, behaviors, and techniques. And so if you just think about those three macro topics, then you can kind of fill in all the things below. So like mindset stuff, all the obvious, but how do I manage people that I worked with last week? How is that transition, right? Hey, that's for everybody else, right? Wait. We're entitled, we're on the same page, that type of stuff, or how to deal with comfort zones. How to identify a comfort zone on my team? And then what do I have to do for that? And then you have to talk about confidence and conviction as a sales manager. Listen, if you're doing something for the very first time, it's tough. It's tough. I can't tell you how many hours I would stay up when I first started leading people, knowing that I had to do something tomorrow, probably with people that are older than I was, right? And it was the very first time. I mean, you freak out. Let's do it this way. I freaked out, right? It was hard because I didn't want to embarrass myself. I didn't want to embarrass the company. I wanted to do the right thing. That's certainly there. And things like management courage, having the ability to do what you need to do, regardless of how uncomfortable it is, or even the behavioral stuff, like the cadence of what we should be doing and when we should be doing it. It's rare that organizations have this recipe. These are the things that you need to be doing. Here's the frequency of when, and here's when you should be doing it. I think if we could create that path, we've talked about it already, it would be so much easier. And then of course, you've got all this list of technique stuff, right? So how do you do team sell? How do you debrief? How do you interview? How do you set expectations and goal setting? The list goes on, but I agree. For us, I think we're known for sales training, and we're all in now for sales management training. And that really is going to be the flag that we plant moving forward for us because of all the reasons why we've just said.
Yeah, yeah, thank
Something
you.
in, oh, go ahead. Sorry, David.
No, Andrew, I was going to come to you because, I was, Dave knows this, several months ago, I was brainstorming with myself on all the topics a sales manager leader might want to learn, right? And I think I got to 64. I'm not exaggerating. And then I thought I better stop, because this is crazy. My dining room table was, spread with all these papers and things. And you'll be glad to hear we've distilled that into a much shorter list of things that's digestible. But I'm curious, Andrew, going back to you, as to, are there places that you've learned are the right places to start when a salesperson is moving into a sales manager role, as with all the things that they're going to have to embrace and digest?
So there are a couple of things there. One is, you know, a really good sales manager, for all intents and purposes, is what I would call the S umbrella, right? I'm not going to use the full word because this is a family program, right? But that's ultimately what a good sales manager does, right? Is they are protecting the team from all the different things that are going on in the organization that could distract that seller from hitting their number. So what happens is a sales rep that gets promoted to a sales manager all of a sudden is on the other side of that umbrella and is like, oh, this is what this job really is. Because they don't actually know what the sales manager job is, because they're looking up and all they see is somebody who's essentially helping them, achieve their number, holding them accountable, achieving their number, right? But they don't see all of that blocking and tackling that the manager is doing to prevent the team from being distracted. So now all of a sudden, they're on the hook for managing all those distractions. And that's really what we're talking about, is all these different things that a manager is responsible for. They can't let the team see those. And that's a key component of whatever this program is to get managers prepared, is exposing them to that very early. Is like, this is what the job actually is. And is this what you really want to do? Because a lot of them look at it like, yeah, I got to chase the quota on my own. And, I'm getting tired of that. It'd be great if I had 8 people working for me chasing the number and I'm just, enjoying myself up here. They just don't see what's on the other side of that whole thing. So that's got to be a key component. And another too is like, at least at HubSpot anyway, a lot of the newer managers, they don't know how to look at like the equation for winning in just a cold, and sort of the cold light of day. It's like, you've inherited your 8 reps and maybe they're people you were managing. And everybody gets into sales manager because I want to help others succeed. I want to coach them. I really love developing others. Like, they're really driven by all that, and that's all great. But at the same time, you got to be able to look and go, how many A's, B's, and C players do I have? And if I'm sitting, and I like to look at it as, the A bucket, the B bucket, the C bucket, but then there's also pluses and minuses, like A plus, A minus, B plus, B minus, C plus, C minus. And the pluses and minuses are the attitude, right? The A, B, and C is their ability to actually execute the job, but then what's their attitude in doing it? And can I map out my team along that lines? And if I'm sitting looking at my team map, and man, I've got like 3 B pluses, 2 B minuses, and 3 C's on my 8-person team, I will never win. I will not hit my quota. It's impossible. I got to have at least 2 A's, ideally 3, right? A couple of B's, and ideally no C's. Like, I can win with that all day long. And a lot of times they don't know how to make that judgment. And they need to learn that very early to understand what's the equation for winning. And if they don't understand that, they're going to end up carrying a lot of reps on their backs, because ultimately they want to create independent sellers that can reach the number on their own. And they don't need me as a super rep carrying their number. And the quicker a new manager understands, like, yeah, it's the coaching and all that stuff and the soft skill piece, but then there's the hard math of this game. And do you understand what that math is and what the math is to win? And how do you get your team into a position to win?
Yeah, the hard skills are incredibly important, but I don't want to discount the soft skills piece. So many sales managers, their exposure to sales is not great sales managers, meaning people that lead with the stick, that they are really aggressive with their sales teams, that they're kind of very domineering to them. And so along the way, they haven't picked up good habits on motivation and what it means to actually lead and motivate others. And even in the times we live in, we have so much going on in these folks' personal lives, and sales is already a high stress game, right? It is a roller coaster every single month, quarter, in trying to bring those deals across the line, that I think you really do have to put real emphasis in training and education on the things that are really hard for them to seek out on their own, right? There are other places that they can go to get sales skills and learn how to forecast. But when it comes to leading with empathy, being able to mentor those folks from an emotional standpoint when they're not hitting their number, and learn how to lean in to support them and motivate them, that's something that great sales leaders can do, but very, very few actually get any real training in doing it. And so that to me is a hallmark of really an important piece not to skip over.
It's an excellent point. It's the balance of those two things. Like, that's the thing with a sales manager. You need to be able to put a foot in each one of those camps. Like, I can look at it, in the cold light of day, and then also I have an abundance of empathy. Like,
Yes.
those are the great ones who can straddle that line with grace.
Michelle, you said, which is just flashed into my head when you said people are going in with this type of management style, which is not necessarily what we'd like. I'm just curious on how many new sales managers actually replicate what was done to them because they don't know any better. There's nothing else for them to do. Like, I spent half my life saying, I'm never going to do what my dad just did, or I'm never going to do what my mom just did. I'm going to let them have candy whenever they want to, whatever it is. But they get to a certain age, and then I spent half my life saying, oh my gosh, I became them. So, I'm just mimicking whatever I observed. And I think that's the real struggle sometimes for sales managers that don't have the sales management enablement process that we're talking about. They mimic what was done to them. And we know before, this all started, how bad some of that is. And I think that just perpetuates that. Have you seen that?
Yeah, it's an uphill battle. For enablement, they're coming in and they're dealing with all of this almost unconscious actions that these reps who become managers, or just longtime managers who never really learned any other way. And so it really is, the work is cut out for enablement to come in and reshape and re-envision what a program can tap into. And you're starting to see a lot more programs focus in on those soft skills, the leading with empathy, the focus on how to just be supportive, and how to even say things in a way that are supportive, that could be brand new for a lot of folks. So yeah, I pass it over to Andrew to wrap that piece up.
I couldn't agree more with that. It's an interesting job, right? You have to be able to do a lot of things. Basically people that I get, that are new sales managers, and I work with them, they're like, I can't believe how much of a psychologist I need to be to my sellers. And that is part of the job. But at the same time, they're accountable to that number. And yeah, like, if you don't, really what you're talking about is the culture of the sales organization, right? And enablement has the opportunity to adjust that culture in a way that leads to more successful outcomes, not just in the results they produce, but in the people that progress through your organization, right? And that work their way up into those next layers of leadership. So, I mean, the adjustments you make in the program to start shifting those things now pay dividends, like, for years and years and years, as your organization, any sales organization turns over. Reps are going to leave, managers are going to leave. They're either going to leave because they're getting promoted, or they're going to other roles in the business, or they're moving on to other opportunities. And that's why I think sales is a unique environment in which culture change can happen faster than in some other places, because there is more of a throughput nature in the job, right? Which this shift can actually happen fairly quickly relative to the rest of a company, because of that. And I think if you've got a really strong program in place, it can really pay dividends and drive a completely different set of outcomes in your organization.
Yeah, some great things there, and I like your analogy about the S umbrella, Andrew, and thank you for keeping it family friendly.
Of course.
You know, the other thing I think about, and I think we're right to think about the role they have with their team. I also think sometimes what is a surprise for sales managers is the newfound responsibilities they have back into the organization, and the opportunity I think they have there for leadership, you know, because where they sometimes get an unfair and bad rap is, you know, the reputation of, well, missed quotas, forecast is inaccurate, they're not filling out CRM, whatever it is, right? Where we all hear those, and largely from people who don't understand how challenging the role is. But I do think they have an opportunity to lead there also. And you know, with some of the things that you have all talked about, is that if you can start to solve for some of those things, the organization is going to appreciate that, you know, ultimately. So I want to tie us off here and just pivot slightly. So in the broader scheme of sales enablement, sales manager enablement, um, you, Andrew, Michelle in particular, you've got a lot of, you know, deep experience here, but many other organizations are still contemplating, you know, what kind of investments they might make here and how they should go about it.
They're late to the party.
Yeah, yeah, maybe. You know, Andrew, if you can kick us off here, you know, what are some of the practical ways people might think about beginning sales enablement programs, implementations, or disciplines, however you want to characterize it, you know, if they are yet to take that big step?
I mean, I think the first thing is, I guess, what I would call, you know, a gaps analysis. And, you know, where do you see the friction in your business? Like, where do you want to be versus where you are? What constitutes those gaps? And, you know, how do you, what would it, which ones, if you eliminated them, would be easiest to eliminate and the highest impact, right? And like, because that's ultimately what enablement is doing, right? It's trying to enable sales to happen faster, right? More effectively, more predictable outcomes, all these things we talked about. And you can't set up the program unless you understand like what your desired state looks like. Like if we could wave a magic wand and wring out all of the things that are making our lives difficult in whatever we're selling, what would it look like? Like, can you envision that? You know, we would have this, we wouldn't be doing this, this would be easier. Like, that's the start of your enablement initiative. And then you prioritize that and go, what are the easiest things to fix that have the highest impact? And that's where I'd start. That's honestly, we didn't have a really strong enablement practice 3.5 years ago. And that's what we did is we looked at, you know, where are the biggest pain points and what are the ones that we could solve really easily. And that's how our program started. And we've just been continually knocking down that list to where we now have a very robust program in place that's made a huge difference in the scaling of the business.
Fantastic.
The number two piece right after that one is making sure that you are going to the very top, the C-suite, and you are getting their buy-in. And you are saying, hey, we have identified these gaps. Here is what we think we can build to get there. However, we recognize this is a battle for mind share. We recognize that it is going to take time and energy and accountability of our leadership team to make this successful. The last thing that enablement wants to do is be an order taker, right? Is saying, okay, I'll go build this for you, and then nothing happens. You agree to bring on enablement, so you're putting an investment there. You're agreeing to maybe pay for a program that they're going to come in and facilitate. That can be, you know, a good chunk of investment that can really pay off, but it only will pay off if that reinforcement program is there and supported and everyone is dedicated to seeing that through. And I think that is where I see the most common misstep is everybody wants to go do the needs analysis. Everyone wants to point out the problems, but nobody wants to actually say, okay, I'm signing up to be accountable and I'm willing to carve out the time that's going to be dedicated to this to see it through.
I think you also have to explain to senior leaders about the ROI because it's difficult to measure that sometimes, right? So you don't want this to something that you start and it's an event, but not a process, not a way of life. Well, I think once you start this, you have to finish it. And when people are looking at ROI, it's a little harder, only because think about it, is enablement getting the kudos when we increase sales? Probably not. That's going to be somebody else, right? So it's a tough thing. And I think you need to educate senior leadership. And senior leadership should be starting these programs. If you're going to do a program, they should be kicking off stuff. They should tell everybody why it's important. They need to be that sponsor. They need to be that, that mouthpiece, that figurehead, so they're all in. I think that's so important. And when it doesn't happen, people are like, I don't know how important this is. And I think that's a shame.
Yeah, at its core, it's like, what's the charter of the enablement team? That needs to be very clear, and senior executives need to buy off on that charter and provide that backing and support, or the program just won't work.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, guys, this has been I can't believe how fast the time has gone. I really appreciate everybody's contribution here on our panel. So I'm going to throw slides back up here and just thank everybody again for their time. So I think there's been a lot of things to take away from this. There's a few that certainly jumped out to me. I loved the discussion around, thinking about enablement, whether it's for sales people or sales managers, not so much as a function or a role, more of a discipline. I love that notion of shared accountabilities, across the sales management and sales enablement communities, which I think is, a really important thing to get that connection and mutual sort of understanding of roles and contributions. Andrew, I like that point about, really thinking about that gap analysis if you're embarking on this journey, or I think at any point, right, that's something you probably want to continually be doing, and really trying to identify those, easier, high impact initiatives that could really make a difference. And then, I think the role of sales managers and thinking about some of those traits, where to start with them, how to look for people that are showing those leadership qualities, giving them opportunities to maybe mentor, coach other people, maybe before they even get the job. What about that notion? Isn't that radical? Actually equip people before they get the job. There's an interesting concept. So I think some terrific things. So I want to just say thank you to our panel for their contributions. It was really terrific discussion. A couple of things I did want to leave you with. So for everybody attending today, there is a couple of things we're going to give you as leave behinds. So everybody's going to be receiving a copy of one of our research reports that is around the essential components of sustaining overachieving sales performance. So a bit of a long title, but it covers a lot of things in terms of what are some of those key things in driving overarching consistent sales performance. And then we will also leave you with some contact points for our panel through LinkedIn. And then also access to some resources to Sandler for those of you that would like to learn more. So let me say thank you to everybody again on the panel, and good luck to everybody out there and good selling.